your sound better.
So Moses here with WO Production, and today's a very exciting day because Ableton Live 11 is finally with us. The team at Ableton have introduced a whole host of new features, whilst also not massively overhauling the overall feel of Ableton. They've introduced some new instruments such as the drum synth, as well as some effects such as hybrid reverb, spectral time, chorus ensemble, flanger phaser, and spectral resonator. As well as this, they've also adopted a lot more Max for Live devices into the Ableton template, as well as delivered some new sound packs featuring companies such as Spitfire Audio. Now I think this is much needed and a really great improvement to what we already have with Ableton. They've also introduced some much needed editing features such as group editing and comping. So without further ado, let's hop into Ableton Live 11 and take a look at some of the new features which they've given to us. Let's dive in. The first thing we're going to take a little look at is Ableton's new drum synth. Now you can see here you've got various objects such as clang, claps, cymbals, FM, hi-hat, kicks, samplers, snares and a tom. Now these just act as individual triggers, so if you drag one down it will just replace the entire MIDI instrument that you have. However, what I've done is I've just dropped them into a drum rack as you would with samples, and then you can assign these to individual notes and then tune them as you want. You can see that we have a pitch dial here, we have a drive here, an attack, click, and some OT there. We then have the decay, the envelope, and the volume. So you can see it's quite a versatile and easy to use drum synth, which kind of provides an extra electronic element to your tracks. And when you combine it with some of the new effects that they've added, you can get some really cool and interesting effects of it. So we'll take a look at the hybrid reverb now and just see what they've done and how we can use it on this drum track. So you can see that I do have a drum bass effect running as well as a limiter, and we'll just drop in the reverb onto the channel. Something else that I quite like that they've done is they've now actually grouped the effects into folders to make it a bit easier to access, as they are now growing the effects that they have. So we'll just go down to reverb and resonance and we'll just drop in the hybrid reverb. Now as you can see, we do have a convolution element to it, and you also have an EQ for your dampening. Apart from that, it's pretty much just a standard reverb though. But one thing I do like about it is they've got a really long pre-delay, which kind of gives some interesting and strange effects when you really take it to the max. You then have options for how you want to process the reverb, whether you want it to be serial and run through the convolution into the algorithmic reverb, or if you want to have them standing next to each other. You then have a freeze, modulation, and some other kind of functions, and we'll just hear what that sounds like. So you can see some really cool features in that reverb and a much needed addition to the current Ableton reverbs. You did have the option to have the convolution reverb from Max for Live, but this just makes it a bit more accessible and a bit more easy to use, and also has that kind of verified Ableton stamp. Now it is also a very cool reverb in the fact that you have a lot of convolution samples to choose from, and each one of them can provide a unique and interesting flavour to your sound. So now, speaking of interesting flavours, we'll look at the Spectral Time, which is a new delay that they've released, which is really quite exciting, especially when you use it on things like drums. So this is the Spectral Time. So you can see you have a few features here. You can shift the pitch of the delay, adjust the feedback, have the stereo width coming up, as well as some spray and fade in settings. Now this is really cool because again it kind of gives you an extra delay to provide some weird and unusual textures that you wouldn't get from, say, a standard delay, or unless if you did want to use it on a standard delay you'd probably have to have quite a complex effects chain set up with frequency shifters and so on. You can see here that we do have some modulators, and they have introduced some CV tools. However, I don't have any modular gear, so unfortunately I can't really use the CV tools. Anyway, moving on and away from that depressing zone, let's take a look at the chorus ensemble and the phaser flanger that they've introduced. So this is the chorus ensemble. Just kind of does the usual things that you'd expect from a chorus. The vibrato one's particularly cool because you get a lot of pitch variation going on with it. So again, a really useful tool for some interesting sound design that you probably wouldn't be able to do before without having to do some pretty complex effects chains. You also have the phaser flanger, which will just drop on after the chorus ensemble. So again, it's keeping to the standard thing that runs throughout all of Ableton, which is keeping it simple, accessible, and easy to use, whilst also delivering really, really high quality samples and sounds. Now, the doubler could be especially useful when you're using it on vocals as a vocal doubler. So I'm really happy to see that Ableton have kind of condensed and combined some of their plugins into these new units, and I'm really excited to kind of use them on some of my tracks a bit more and get used to the new layouts that they've introduced. Then finally we have the Spectral Resonator. Now I'm a big fan of Ableton's Resonator, and this kind of goes a little bit further and gives us a bit more option for sound manipulation. So you see here you've got your frequency, which kind of sets the pitch that we might want. We then have high frequency dampening and low frequency dampening, as well as some time stretching and pitch shifting stuff, as well as a few different options for how we want to affect the sound while it's in the resonator. So let's just have a little play around and see what these do. Kind of sounds like I'm in a bit of a tank. You also here have an option to have the sources coming in from MIDI to help you trigger when the Spectral Resonator might go off. So that pretty much sums it up for the new effects. There are plenty more added in Max for Live, and we'll look at some more of the glitchy ones later on in the video. But for now, let's hop over to the keyboard and take a look at some of the new sounds. So I've got the Spitfire strings loaded up, and I'm just going to play a few little demos and we're going to see how they sound. So you can see they sound really, really, really nice. And I really think that Ableton did need this to happen. We do have a few instruments and effects in Ableton, but to be honest, they were never that great, and you did have to rely quite heavily on third-party libraries. However, with the Spitfire sounds loaded up, they sound absolutely phenomenal. And they've also added loads and loads of cool features, and obviously you get the standard expression and dynamic control that you normally do. So I have mapped this to my Nord MIDI controller. However, if you had a push or a controller that did automatically link up with Ableton, it would automatically map these for you. Now Spitfire have given you the standard things such as dynamics and technique. And now one thing I really like about the technique function is when you're in, say, Native Instruments and you're using one of their orchestral libraries, when you switch through the techniques, you have to then restart the sample for it to work. However, how they've mapped this out in Ableton is really cool because you kind of transition through the different techniques as it plays. And I'll just play this so you can hear what I mean. So we'll start on the lowest technique here. Which I just think is a really cool touch because, you know, if you're playing the actual violin, you do have the option to change the techniques as you're bowing the sound. So it's just a really cool and really neat little addition. So now let's move on to the brass and hear how that sounds. So you can see again, it's got the same kind of qualities as the string quartet and just delivers an amazing all-round sound with a similar style of effects controls. Now we'll also take a look at the upright piano now and hear how that sounds. So you can really see how Spitfire have put their essence into these packs and created a really lovely and amazing sounding collection of instruments for Ableton. And it is much needed, like I've said, because Ableton was slightly lacking in that department. And they've also included a whole host of other sampled orchestral elements for us to really dive into and get our hands dirty. And I hope it also inspires people to write some slightly more orchestral music using Ableton, because if you combine orchestral music with the audio editing and the kind of weird effects that you can do in Ableton, you can come up with some really interesting and unique sounds. So all for this. And now let's take a little look at the group editing, which is another feature that I'm very excited about, which I'll explain a bit more as we look at it. So I've got open a multi-track drum recording, as I feel this is the best way to describe and show off what the group editing can do and how it can help us, and how I think it's one of the biggest advantages that Ableton has introduced. Now, if any of you have had any experience of recording and mixing live drums or just live instruments in general, you'll know that the biggest issue we encounter is phase when we're trying to time align. Now, Ableton previously didn't really have an option for time aligning whole drum kits or potentially whole bands that have been recorded in the same space. With this feature, I can now see myself using Ableton for all my mixing projects. I used to have to dip into Logic if there was any form of live instrumentation, just because of the kind of phase locking of the drum quantization. But with the group editing, we can now edit drums, live bands as much as we want to without having any issues with phasing, which I think is absolutely massive and is really going to take Ableton up to the next level for kind of all-round usage. The only thing I would like to see them introduce, which would take them up an even bigger notch to the high level and would really eradicate the use for programs for me like Logic and Pro Tools, would be to have 5.1 surround sound all the way up to Dolby Atmos options. But for now, this is so great, and we're going to dive in and have a little look at what this means for us. So you can see here we've just got our drum multi-track, and now to enable multi-editing, you just select the tracks that you want, right-click, and just go link tracks, and now they're linked. And now you'll see that when I apply my warp markers, because, I mean, let's be honest, editing in Ableton is such a breeze. It's why anyone that uses Ableton loves it so much, and I think it stands head and shoulders above programs like Logic and Pro Tools for editing. I mean, that could be a personal preference because I've grown up using Ableton, but I am also fluent in Logic, and I just find that it's not as smooth and fluid as Ableton. So you can see here that as I'm moving these around, it's also moving all the other drum notes, which is essential because it means that we can now time align these drums and get them nice and tight without having any phase issues and without having to jump into Logic or Pro Tools to do this work for us. Another cool thing about group editing is we can apply phase to global tracks, because I don't know if anybody has used Ableton to record vocals with, but if you have a lot of vocals stacked up in doubles and harmonies and you just want to do a group fade to everything, it is a bit of a faff. There is a shortcut to do it, but again, it's not quite as fluid as some of the other more prestigious kind of mixing and editing softwares. So again, I'm just super happy to see this brought to Ableton, and I really don't see myself needing to ever leave Ableton ever again. So you can see here that, we can fade around and really, do whatever we want with these group linked tracks. Now, another really key feature that they've introduced is comping. Now we're going to dive into this, and normally it would be used for vocal editing and vocal recording, but I'm going to show you another way which you can use it, which should inspire you to kind of get a bit more hands-on with the comping and not be so afraid of it if you don't actually record stuff like guitars or vocals. So let's hop onto the Neutron and see what we can do. So now that we've got that into Ableton, let's take a look at how we can use the comping feature to cut between some of the favourite parts of the clip that we recorded. Now, previously Ableton would just create a long audio file when you had it in loop mode, but now with the comping feature, it means that we can get a little bit more creative and you kind of take that extra hassle out of editing once you've recorded it down, which enhances our creativity and speed of workflow. So let's take a little look at how this works and how we can use it for not just on vocals, but for recording things like what we just did with the Neutron. So just to show the take lanes, you just do the same thing that you would do if you were group editing. You just right click and then just go down to the show take lanes. Now, if you want to add a section back up to the main line, you just highlight it and hit the enter key. You can also preview it by just soloing these little lines, and then you can hear the individual comp takes without having to move them all up to there. So let's hear how this sounds. So you can see that we've got a lot of takes here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to randomly chop and slice them and just see how it sounds. So let's see how that sounds. The other nice thing is then all those regions are actually chopped up in that loop, so that then you can go into them individually and reverse them, apply some of Ableton's kind of complex warping modes to it, and just have a bit of fun with it without having to tediously chop up all these parts that you want to chop up. You can also just, apply fade so that it's a little bit smoother and not so harsh. So you can see how by using comping, we can just speed up our workflow and become a bit more creative. And such as with the group editing, it just means that we don't have to dive into Logic or Pro Tools to do very basic recording functions. So I'm very happy they've introduced this, and I'm really excited to see how it can speed up my workflow. Anyway, the real question is, can it glitch? So as you can see, it does do glitch. Now, this is partly due to all the new packs that they've added. And again, just like what I was saying with the Spitfire pack, it's really great to see them put more of an emphasis on supplying us with these sounds. They've always done these packs, but this is very much a kind of flagship thing that they've done with the Ableton Live 11 release. And they've really carefully curated, and it really does make some great additions, and I'm very excited to start using them in my own productions. Something to note as well is that they've put a lot more of an emphasis on some of the Max for Live devices. For example, one of the main ones they've included with this is the pitch loop 89. And I've added this down here to this loop, and it just creates this really weird sound. So I'll just play the loop from where it starts. So you can see that just with that, that's just a preset I selected, and already it's like super glitchy and gnarly and kind of does all these weird things with your sound. So you have other options as well, such as using the pitch loop 89 with the hybrid reverb and spectral time to also create some very strange and otherly world kind of effects. So I just used this on this reverse vocal, which I'd grabbed from one of our sample packs. So as you can see, there is a plethora of new and updated audio effects that we can use by our productions. They've also added all these new packs, and I'm very excited to start using Ableton Live 11 a lot more in my productions. Drop a comment and let us know what you think about Ableton Live 11 and how you plan to be using it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel because we will be having some more videos on Ableton Live. We'll be doing a bit more of a deep dive into some of the new effects and features that they've added. Until the next one, peace out.